I'm curious what you got here, Jake. We'll probably talk about a few things, maybe some Lions contracts if we can, but I figured we'd start with the kicking stuff because we're kind of in the groove right now. We interviewed Jake Moody for the first segment, and we've been talking about kicking pretty much ever since. So I'm curious to hear you guys kind of go back and forth about some of the kicking analytics and metrics that you have, because Shayne was talking about that both in his career and then coaching career, and then now he uses a lot of them for his coaching school as well.
Right, that's so interesting. I did not know Shayne had a coaching school, but that's very interesting because I've always sort of thrown around the line of like when I have kids someday, I want them to be kickers because I just see it as something, one, that I'm always been fascinated by, and two, that it seems like for someone who's doesn't come from no one in my family's the size of an offensive lineman, so that always seemed like the most feasible goal. But yeah, so in terms of the analytics I was really focused on the impact of the K-ball rule change and how that's really just changed the entire dimensions in terms of long kicks in the NFL. So yes. I was looking at the frequency of kicks from 55 to 59 and then 60 plus, and I found some really interesting stuff. So I mean, they were 21 attempts this year from 60 plus, and that's 50% more than there's been any other season. But what really blew me away is kickers made those 12% of the time. They made those 57% of the time, and they made 12 of those kicks, which last season had 2024 season had 14 kicks from 60 plus. Before that, there had never even been a season with more than 10 plus kicks from 60, and now we're making 12 in a season. So that really blew me away. I mean, my model that I have for field goal probability, to sort of calculate field goal probability over expected and turn that into kicker, expected points added numbers, and really sort of quantify the impact of of having such a strong kicker. I mean, my model expected 37% of those kicks to get hit. So that gulf right there is just incredible and shows how good these kickers have gotten on the long kicks. But a lot of it can be tied into this rule change with the K balls and how they really can, they have 60 of these balls throughout the season, and they can really prep them, as much as they need. Not, the way they used to back before even Shayne played, where it was, they'd throw them in an oven or inject them with stuff. And
yeah, that was pre-1997 or 98, I think. They were freaking doctoring those things up big time.
Yeah, I mean, I think I saw something that a team even filled up the ball with helium at one point. So they're not doing that now, but they can, really rough up the surface, increase the sweet spot, and that's really allowed kickers to just go crazy on these long kicks. Now, I did realize that I would have assumed the effect would have also shown in those kicks from 55 to 59, and they did hit, 67% or an expected probability of 56%. So that is a nice, gulf, but it actually isn't more on a per attempt basis. Similar probabilities have existed for the last couple of seasons as kickers have gotten really good from distance, but the attempts did increase. I mean, there were 91 attempts between 55 and 59 this year. That's 14 more than last season, and that last season was also the peak for some of these stats too. So it took what was a gradual sort of increase in a kicker's ability to hit from long range and just added even more to it. So now the kickers have just been incredible. And I think, you could throw some of the increased attempts on the change in the kickoff rules and how, teams don't need to have as long sustained drives to get to field goal range. And, some of those, offenses that aren't as, good from, just sustaining drives are now, having coaches just choose to kick. And that could explain some of it, but I don't think it explains the percentage hits. I mean, that's just something else.
Well, one thing I've noticed over the years, and this is from before my career, during my career, and after my career, is first off, it's a different caliber of athlete. It used to be the little small soccer player who said, I can kick a football because I can kick a soccer ball. We had generational knowledge growth on someone who innovated something, perfected it, maybe even found a better way to do it, then taught it to the next generation, and then so on and so on. And there's a little bit of that. There's nutrition, there's strength and conditioning upgrades, and then higher level athletes, and even more of an understanding of sports psychology. Maybe you can throw all those in a little cake batter and still be able to pull out a pretty good cake, but definitely when analytics came into it, that might have changed a few things. And then also the fact that that new ball changed the confidence not only of the kicker telling the coach, hey, let me try this in practice so I can show you I can do it. And then the coach seeing, holy crap, he can do it. And then now they're calling for 60-yard field goals on fourth down in the middle of the first quarter. instead of those 60-yard field goals only being like the Hail Mary kicks at the end of the half or the game. And what that's also done is whatever the statistics that have changed on that, it's made punters 40 to 45% punters and 60 to 55% holders is their job title versus a punter, because they're punting less and less now because of that.
Right, and actually what I noticed is, and I think this could be something to do with how practice time is allocated, but also just due to maybe changes in the ball, but also like notable is at the same time that all this, like the kickers got really good, this was the worst season by punter EPA, I mean, in years actually, like the worst of the decade, which I think, like, you know, even if you control for the weather and the week by a proxy of the week of the season, it's just actually like fallen off from what was actually an increase going into, you know, this season, which suggests that either it's a practice time issue or a focus issue where punters are more focused on this, you know, or on their holding job. But it's just such an interesting sort of development alongside the long kicks that the punters have actually not gotten better, but actually their performance in terms of, you know, just gaining field position for teams has actually gotten worse. And yeah, you can definitely also bake in the kickoff rules into that as well, where they're also, a lot of the punters are responsible for doing that, and that also changes how they're spending their practice time. So it's a little bit tough to, you know, disentangle what's causing what here. But I thought that was an interesting development that also caught my eye when looking at all the kicking stats.
That's an interesting one, Jake, because I would think with what Shayne's talking about that they're going from a further distance here with the field goals, that would mean that the punters are starting further back, so you're not having to do, you know, the short kicks. So do you think that's a practice issue like Jake's talking about, Shayne, that it's more so, okay, we're not able to focus on this quite as much and get our repetitions in so that we're able to maximize what we do in every situation?
I can promise you there's no head coach or special teams coach that is going to shorten the amount of punt protection practice time, because getting a punt blocked is one of the biggest telltale signs of a momentum and score deficiency of a game. Honestly, what I think it is you're putting punters at awkward distances that they don't know if they should just punt it bombs away or if they should hit the flip-flop pooch type punt. They're getting in these less opportunities. So the you know, if you do the math, whatever you call the subset of data is a smaller amount.
Yeah, the sample size is smaller.
The sample size is smaller. So obviously the increments between higher and lower averages are going to be slightly larger. So one little miscue is going to make it much bigger of a difference than one miscue and then a few good punts where they down it inside the 5 or down it inside the 2 or whatever. I think you throw that into the mix, and then you throw in, you know, you're just not getting as many of those, you know, 40-yard short, you know, 38-yard pooch punts. Yeah, that can control and shorten maybe some of the net averages and some of the regular averages. But when you get in that in-between stage where a punter doesn't know if I'm swinging away or if I'm check swinging, because it's a completely different thing. It's almost like if you're really good with your sand wedge or your pitching wedge, you know, you hit your pitching wedge 140, all right, or you hit your sand wedge 110. Okay, I'm going to tell you my golf game here. Okay, I hit my sand wedge 110, pretty good. I'm confident, full swing. But now I got to hit 160 yards. Okay, how far do I take my backswing before I start to accelerate through the ball? It's how often do I get to practice that shot? But when you do your full swing, it's over and over and over. It's always the same. It's almost the same no matter what club you use. But when you start having to do those check swings, it's a little bit different and you lose some confidence. The weather can affect it a little bit more. And I think that plays into it. Because I can promise you, if the team doesn't even give you the same amount of time and team period, the punter's over on the other field working on it themselves. They're getting the time in. If anything, you know, maybe gunners aren't making the you know, the best play on the ball. I don't know, but I think it's just because they're getting caught in this no man's land of do I crank away at this or do I check swing?
That makes sense, because I I thought it would be more between the level of aggressiveness that we were talking about earlier in the show and the fact that you are going to kick a field goal from farther back. I thought the starting position would be farther back for punts. I don't know if that's true. Just from the gameplay standpoint, it seems like it would be headed that way more. So that's a good one, Jake. That's a surprising one. Do you have more on that or more stats like that for us?
I don't have specific data on where on punt distance. That's something based on this conversation I'm actually going to look into, because I think this is a really interesting issue to try to like narrow down and see what's actually going on. I also think that like the job of a kicker has like an increasingly important job of the kickers and punters are those who are doing, these kickoffs, because that is like now just a huge field position swing to start a drive. If you can nail one of those line drive kicks and really master that. I think we saw this season the teams that were able to sustainably like actually get the ball to bounce into the end zone had a lot of success in terms of just controlling the field. So I think that that's like something that like when I'm iterating on this kicking model in the offseason, I think I'm going to try and incorporate a lot of that and also look at how punting has been affected, because I have some like raw data on just like the averages, but I think Shayne's right to point out that I want to look that we should be looking at the punts from the various distances and see, one, what's the frequency? Are we seeing punters one punt less and two punt less from some of these shorter distances? And maybe that's where a lot of the EPA and value is being added, where they have the short distances, they can easily pin, the ball inside the 20 or even the 10. Whether it's the gunners is an interesting question. I think I need tracking data to look at that, and you can maybe even tie that into the new kickoff rules, because they're not doing nearly as many reps of these types of like running down the field and trying to track the player, as opposed to starting from much closer and trying to navigate the blocker. So it could be a little bit of that as well. But I think it hasn't been enough time to necessarily that the players weren't used to at least the old rules. So I honestly am not sure of the exact answer, and I don't have and if I don't have data to support it, I usually don't like to claim it. But it is a really interesting development, I thought. And it perfectly ties into all this kicking stuff too. I think it's all related in some way. It's just about figuring out exactly how.
So if you're interested, if you want to look this up, there's a thing called a boom rating, and it was developed by I don't know if it was a student, post-grad at Florida Atlantic University, and it basically was a way of measuring the efficiency of a punt versus just measuring distance and averages, because distance and averages don't always play out to say who's a better punter, because let's just say he's always having to punt from the 45-yard line. He doesn't have much field to work with, but how many of those yards can he pin the ball so that he can be more efficient with his punt? So this guy created this. It'd be worth looking up, but I think with all of this stuff across the board, I think they all correlate when it comes to the distance that they're punting from, when it comes to the amount of time they may be putting into it, when it comes to, the field position battle after kickoffs, when I think really this is the first year they really started trying to do those line drive kicks. It was when the rule first started, everyone talked about what they were going to do, but almost everybody just kicked it in the end zone, I think, that first year. And
100%. Yeah, that was an odd development too, because that didn't seem like a positive decision from like an expected points perspective.
Yeah, and it was curious because we all talked about it in the kicking world, but no one was doing it in the game. And I think it was a few kickers maybe practiced it a little bit more in the offseason, went to their coaches and said, hey, we should do this because let me show you what I can do. And it kind of became a what club can I pull out of the bag versus, let me just hit my driver out the back of the end zone.
Exactly, yeah. And I think that partially became necessary with the touchback moving from the 30 to the 35, where the coaches said, we can't just like let teams start at the 35 as much as they want. And frankly, they should have been saying the same about the 30. I think there were concerns that some had, like coaches about, we don't want to risk, a long return or a touchdown. But I also like the frequency of those touchdowns and long returns. I mean, you have to counteract that with the possibility of a fumble on the punt, which actually there were more fumbles on kick returns. I mean, on the kick, not the punt. There were more fumbles on kick returns in 2024 under the old rules than there were touchdowns, which tells you that, there's just a little bit of loss aversion going on where these these coaches are more fearful, I think, of something wrong happening than they are the positive momentum that could be generated from forcing a fumble on a kickoff return, or just getting in, like, stopping the team, on the 20 or 25 instead of at the 30.
Exactly. I agree.
That I just looked that up, Shayne. It's Evan Jaff or Jaffe that invented that. That might be a good guess for the show here if we can try to get him. Yeah, I love what you guys are going. That's why I've just been kind of in the background listening here, because it's great stuff. And you make a great point, Jake, because you always prepare a lot of data for us before you come on. It's got to be more of a call and response thing with you. Now you've got some homework that you can kind of do some research on, and then we'll have you back on and see what you're able to find, because like you said, a lot of this is ever changing with the new kickoff rules, with the different ways they're handling these different situations. So it's changing year by year, so you're getting new data all the time, but it's great stuff. We appreciate you coming on, and we'll look forward to kind of continuing this conversation here through the off season, because kind of pinpointing some of this stuff and covering it, I think, will be a good ballywick for us on the show here.
Absolutely. I look forward to that.
Well, thanks, Jake. Is there anywhere we can send people? I know I know your X account. We can send them there, and I put that in the post. But do you have the podcast back going, or is that still kind of on hiatus?
Podcast is on a hiatus. I tried passing it off as sort of like, once I graduated from Michigan, I wanted to pass it down and, let that platform exist for some of the students that were still there and part of the same group, doing all the sports analytics stuff. And ultimately, I think a lot of them just didn't have the time. So I've been toying around with, figuring out when exactly with, the new job I started and how I can do the podcast. But I am trying to figure out exactly what that will be. In terms of sending people, I also published a website actually yesterday that basically allows you to say which quarterbacks you trust or don't. It's called QBmeter.com. And it just sort of is like an interesting thing to play around with in terms of like crowdsourcing the idea of, which quarterbacks do people think are the best, which is interesting in the sense of how closely it tracks with numbers like EPA per play and other sort of analytic stats, but also some of the raw stats, and just sort of like using like the wisdom of the crowd to inform, the consensus as to, quarterback rankings and which quarterbacks people view as elite versus average versus maybe less than average. And it's just been really interesting to watch all the votes flow in over the last couple of days. So to your audience, if you want to check out QBmeter.com, I'd appreciate, and just sort of, continue to see how that all shakes out as people play around with the site.
I did see that before the show. I haven't been able to deep dive into it, but I would encourage people to go there. We'll try to plug it as well, Jake. It's great stuff, and I like that you're continuing to develop this, because that's the part that we try to do on the show too. Is there's always new information to learn, and so the minute you stop learning, you kind of stop developing, and you're at a steady state there. You're not growing yourself. So we appreciate you coming on, and we'll look forward to having you back on here in the future.